If women were to disappear for a year, or even more, how would life be like? The morning began like any other. A quiet hum of routine settled over cities and towns, where the sun rose in a blanket of warm golden light. The streets buzzed with the familiar sounds of people going about their day. But beneath this normalcy, a strange, almost imperceptible shift was happening. In an unremarkable town, John, a middle-aged father of two, woke up early to the sound of his alarm. He reached over to the other side of the bed, expecting to feel the warmth of his wife, Lisa. But the sheets were cool, and the space next to him was empty. He sat up, groggy and confused, and called out her name. No answer. John wandered through the house, searching each room. First the kitchen, then the living room, and finally the children's bedrooms. The kids, both boys, were still asleep, undisturbed by the absence of their mother. He checked his phone, thinking she might have gone out for an early morning run, but there were no messages, no missed calls. As the minutes ticked by, John's confusion grew into a gnawing worry. He decided to call his neighbor, Sarah, who was always up early. But when the call went straight to voicemail, a cold dread settled in the pit of his stomach. Something was wrong. John turned on the news, hoping for some distraction or explanation. But what he saw on the screen only deepened his anxiety. Reporters were in a frenzy, broadcasting live from various cities around the world. The story was the same everywhere. Women had vanished. Not just a few, but all of them. In a single night, without a trace, every woman on the planet had disappeared. The news anchors, all men, struggled to keep their composure as they reported on the mass disappearance. Hospitals were in chaos, schools were shutting down, and government officials were scrambling to understand what had happened. The world, it seemed, had been thrown into a state of unprecedented crisis. John's thoughts raced as he tried to process the enormity of the situation. His first instinct was to protect his children, to shield them from the uncertainty that loomed over everything. But as the hours passed and the reality of the situation set in, a new fear gripped him. What if they never came back? What if his wife, his daughters, his sister, and every woman he had ever known were gone forever? In the days that followed, society began to unravel. The first impact was felt in the most immediate and personal ways. Families were torn apart, not just emotionally but functionally. Many households, where women were the primary caregivers, found themselves struggling with basic tasks. Men, many of whom had relied on their partners for emotional support, found themselves adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Public services were hit hard. Hospitals, where women made up the majority of the nursing staff, were overwhelmed. Schools, where female teachers were in the majority, had to close their doors. Childcare facilities became obsolete overnight, leaving many men unable to work as they struggled to care for their children. The economy began to falter as businesses slowed, and in some cases, shut down entirely. But the effects of the disappearance went beyond the logistical. As the days turned into weeks, a deeper, more insidious change began to take hold. Without the balancing presence of women, society started to fracture. The absence of mothers, daughters, sisters, and wives created a vacuum in the emotional and social fabric of the world. The media, once a diverse and inclusive platform, became dominated by a single, increasingly narrow perspective. Without women, discussions of gender equality, empathy, and community lost their advocates. The entertainment industry, once vibrant with stories that reflected a wide range of human experiences, grew monotonous and uninspired. Violence and unrest began to spread. In many places, the disappearance of women led to a breakdown of social order. Without the influence of women, who often acted as mediators and nurturers, conflicts escalated. Prisons, already overcrowded, became breeding grounds for further chaos as male inmates, deprived of the calming presence of female guards and staff, grew more unruly. The scientific community, too, was hit hard. Research labs, where women were crucial contributors, saw a sudden drop in productivity. Projects stalled, and breakthroughs became rarer as the world lost a generation of brilliant female minds. The fields of medicine, biology, and environmental science were particularly affected, with long-term consequences that were only just beginning to be understood. But it wasn't just the tangible physical aspects of society that suffered. The disappearance of women had a profound impact on the collective psyche of the world. Men who had once taken the presence of women for granted found themselves grappling with a profound sense of loss and guilt. Conversations that had once been commonplace about love, relationships, family, became taboo, too painful to bear. Religions, which had long been guided by the moral and spiritual influence of women, struggled to find their footing. In many faiths, women were seen as the moral compass, the ones who nurtured the next generation and kept the faith alive. Without them, religious communities splintered and many turned away from their beliefs altogether, questioning the existence of a higher power that could allow such a catastrophe. As the months passed, the world began to adapt, but it was a hollow adaptation. Men took on the roles that women had once filled, but they did so with a heavy heart, knowing that something vital was missing. Some turned to technology, hoping to create artificial substitutes for the companionship and connection they had lost. Others tried to form new communities, banding together in an attempt to rebuild some semblance of normalcy. But no matter how hard they tried, the world could not escape the shadow of its loss. The absence of women was a wound that could not be healed, a void that could not be filled. The world became a colder, harsher place, devoid of the warmth and compassion that women had once brought to it. One day, several years after the disappearance, John found himself sitting alone in the park where he had once taken his children to play. The swings creaked in the breeze, and the grass had grown wild and untamed. He thought about his wife, his daughters, and all the women who had been taken from the world. He thought about the laughter and love that had once filled his life, and how empty it all felt now. As he sat there, a thought occurred to him, a realization that had been growing in the back of his mind ever since that fateful day. The disappearance of women had not just been a loss for men, it had been a loss for the world. The balance, the harmony that had once existed was gone, and in its place was a world that was poorer in every way that mattered. And so, John made a promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to keep the memory of the women alive. He would teach his sons about the importance of respect, empathy, and love. He would ensure that the stories of the women who had once walked the earth were not forgotten, because in the end, that was all he could do. Remember and hope that one day somehow they might return. But until that day came, the world would remain a place of sorrow and longing, a testament to the irreplaceable presence of women who had been the heart and soul of humanity.